Welcome back. This fourth podcast in a series of 5 link podcasts about the golden era of the Weimar Republic looks at the fortunes of the Nazi Party during this golden era. So there's the mind map. We are honing in on this fourth strand here. So you can see the various elements that will make up this podcast. Make sure you download the material from the frog folder. Okay, so key point, okay, for this particular topic. When the Republic was doing well, which it clearly was between 1924 and 1929, the voters were not interested in Hitler and the Nazis. They're not interested in extremist parties, because extremist parties, their message is vote for us because the Republic is doing badly. And the Republic wasn't. For all the reasons we've looked at in the previous podcast, it seemed that on the surface the Republic was recovering in the middle of the 1920s. So on the surface, therefore, this looked to be pretty much of a disastrous period for the Nazi Party. And how can you see that? Well, you can see that in the Reichstag election figures. So here, the key one in 1928, the Nazis only achieved 12 seats in the Reichstag elections. 12 seats was 2.6% of the vote. That's less than it's less than 3 out of every 100 Germans voted for the Nazis in the Reichstag elections of 1928. Now, in the next podcast, we're going to talk about what happened in 1929, the Wall Street crash, which plunged the Republic into difficult times again, and how that reversed the fortunes of the Nazi Party, who in September 1930 got 107 seats, and by July of 1932 they had become the largest political party in the Reichstag. And you can sort of see that turnaround in fortunes just by looking at the bar charts to the right here. So you've got the May 1928 elections here, and the Nazis there are the smallest party. See how here, by September 1930, they have become the second largest party in the Reichstag, and by July 1932, they have become the largest party in the Reichstag. But that's a story for the next podcast. The Nazi Party then was in dire straits in 1924. Hitler was in jail. Remember, he'd been jailed after the Munich Putsch. The party had been banned. Although Hitler was let out of jail early, in December 1924, effectively, when he walked out of the prison, it really looked as if his political career was over. The Nazi Party had been banned, but much more to the point, the voters were no longer interested in him because the Republic was recovering under Stresemann. Hitler, though, was not to be deterred. Remember, he's got a new strategy for power. Okay, and the strategy is to, and it will make. And he very much said it will take us years and years, but he said bad times will return. But when bad times return, our strategy to take power is going to be different from what it has been in the past. We're not going to be marching using a private army, marching on Berlin to take power violently. We're going to be getting votes. So he started that new strategy straight away. He went to see the judge who had sentenced him, and he got the ban on the party lifted in February 1925. And so he effectively started to rebuild the party from scratch. He therefore launched it as a national party, not just a Bavarian party as it had been before. We are now a national party that have got to take our message across the whole of Germany and capture the vote of the German people. And his message to his very tiny party was, that may take us many, many years, and people are not going to be interested in our message while things are going well for Germany, but when bad times return, we have got to be poised to capture the vote. Now, his strategy for doing that was effectively to organise what we call a Gau system. So if you looked at the map on the right, he effectively looked at the map of Germany and broke it into 43 regions called Gaus, and he sent a team of Nazis to each of those 43 regions, and he said to each of those teams, your job is to win the vote of the people living in that region. Now, it's a tall order, okay? It may be a small team. A typical team would consist of what we call a Gauleiter, the leader, with a group of propaganda experts working under the Gauleiter's direction, and their job is to basically target the message at the people of that region to persuade them to vote for the Nazis in the Reichstag elections. And as we're seeing for the first few years, on the surface it seemed that they were not particularly successful. This is an area which students traditionally don't do very well on in the exam, so make sure you really learn those terms. The Gau is the region, the Gauleiter is the propaganda chief whose job it was to campaign for votes in the Gau. Now, that particular, the Gauleiter and his team of Nazis that worked with him were schooled, they were experts in how to organise propaganda. And the basis for this was the rallies. Now, a rally was basically a staged event to persuade people to come along and listen to Nazi ideas. The early rallies were just done often in very basic conditions, often in a beer hall or a sports place, often a football pitch. And as more and more people became attracted to the Nazi rallies, then the Nazis would increasingly hire out bigger venues for these events. And they would organise military-style marches, lots of music and posters, and they would make these rallies as exciting as possible to get people to attend them. The Nazis set up a wide range of organisations aimed at winning the votes. So the way in which they targeted their message was very clever. Hitler very clearly said, look, bad times will return eventually, so we've got to be thinking strategically about that. So what the Nazis did is they very much in the 1920s targeted the children, thinking to themselves, well, they will grow up to become the future voters. When bad times return to Germany, if we've been targeting the children in the meantime, then they will be our future voters. And that was a very, very effective strategy. So a lot of messages, leaflets were given to children when they left school at the end of each day. And the children effectively, there was a baby boom, what we call the baby boom. A lot of children who were born in 1918, 1919, after World War I, and many of them were reaching sort of voting age in the early 30s when Hitler took power, and they became sort of key supporters of the Nazis. But another fundamental one were the SA. Now, the stormtroopers, the brown shirts, the private army of the Nazis, had to change. That's what Hitler's message to them was. Up until 1923, they were literally the military wing of the party whose job was to march on the capital and seize power. But because his strategy now is about getting the vote, not by seizing power violently, he said you've got to change your image. You can't use violence, you can't shoot those guns, you've got to put them away. However, we do still need you. So whenever Hitler organised these mass rallies, the SA would play a key part marching in the inside of the stadiums because they would be an image, they would display unity and discipline and order. Effectively, it'd be like a message to the Germans. This is what Germany will look like if I am your leader. It will be well organised, it will be united, and it will be strong. So the SA had to be very disciplined. They were not allowed to use violence. They were told, keep that under control, but you are an image of unity and order. Now, the key person who really masterminded a lot of these strategies was this man here, a man called Joseph Goebbels. He understood how people thought. So, for example, the mass rallies would be held in the evening, partly because people will be impressed by displays of light shows in the dark, but also because he realised that people are more likely to follow with their hearts, not with their heads. He didn't want people to think about the Nazi message, he just simply wanted people to enjoy the experience of being at Nazi events. And in the evening, people are tired after a day's work. So very much the sort of similar principles nowadays in the modern era, that, for example, pop concerts work so well. They're held at night, and it's all about exciting people rather than appealing to their brain. It's about appealing to their hearts and making them emote. He used newspapers, meetings and posters to gain support from the key groups. He very much sort of like targeted key groups. He understood who the groups were that were unhappy. So we talked about how in 1927, for example, there was an undercurrent of unhappiness in the countryside. Although it looked as if Germany was doing well on the surface, beneath the surface, agriculture was slumping. So the Nazis spent a lot of time in the villages and in the countryside targeting the farmers, and you can see the success of that in like local village elections. So although the Nazis weren't doing very well in national elections, in rural village elections they were doing well. So for example, a lot of small town mayors were Nazis in the 1920s. They also targeted small businessmen. Goebbels understood that the small shopkeeper, the small businessman, had been hit badly by the hyperinflation in 1923, so they very much targeted messages at them as well. So there's a list there of the sort of key groups that the Nazis tended therefore to appeal to. So women I've not mentioned. 2 million more women voters than men because of 2 million men who died in World War I. So the Nazis very much targeted their messages at women. Farmers we've mentioned, the young we've mentioned, in particular middle class groups, because they had lost out in the hyperinflation, and also because the middle classes were most afraid of communism. And remember, the Nazis on the extreme right were very, very much against communism. So like a sleeping snake in the sun, the Nazi Party, they may have looked as if they were not getting much support in terms of national elections, but in terms of what was really happening behind the scenes, they were becoming quite strong. So membership had grown to 100,000 by 1928. There's a factual recall test. You know the routine. Play it, pause, check the answers. There are the answers. And there's two past questions. The first one is an essay. Was it a total failure? Clearly it wasn't. Okay, so you need to develop that. The messages learned. And the second one, in what ways did the Nazi Party try to increase its popularity? That again is a good one. Both those questions have got model answers in the folder, and I have produced podcasts that walk and talk you through each of those. That's the end of this fourth podcast. The next podcast, the final one in this series, then looks at what happened in 1929. The crisis returns in 1929. So if you go straight onto that one now, thank you.